I bought my parents a luxury retirement home to thank them for their sacrifices, but weeks later, I found them treated like servants in their own living room. My sister-in-law had taken over. So, I crashed her party, dropped the deed on the table, and watched her smile vanish. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The feeling in my chest wasn't just anger. It was a physical blow, a sudden, sickening drop in my stomach that felt like I had missed a step on a steep staircase. I stood in the entryway of the house. The craftsman bungalow with the wraparound porch that I had spent the last 8 months renovating in secret, and I couldn't process the visual data my eyes were sending to my brain. I had curated every inch of this space. As an interior designer, this wasn't just a purchase. It was my magnum opus, a love letter written in hardwood floors, quartz countertops, and the specific shade of sage green paint my mother, Martha, had always admired in magazines but could never afford. I had handed them the keys 3 weeks ago. It was supposed to be their sanctuary, the place where my father, David, could finally rest his aching back after 40 years of laying brick, and where Mom could read her mystery novels in the sunroom without worrying about a leaking roof or rising rent. But as I stood there, clutching a bottle of expensive champagne I had brought to celebrate their first month of freedom, the house didn't look like a sanctuary. It looked like a nightclub. And my parents weren't the owners, they were the help. The air was thick with the cloying scent of heavily perfumed lilies and expensive catering. Dozens of women I didn't recognize were milling about the open-concept living room, holding crystal flutes filled with mimosa orange. Pink and gold balloons formed a massive archway over the fireplace. The fireplace I had restored by hand, blocking the view of the family portraits I had carefully hung. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. I scanned the room, looking for the guests of honor, or at least the homeowners. I found my mother first. She wasn't sitting in the custom velvet armchair I had bought specifically for her bad hip. She was curled up on the small, stiff loveseat in the far corner, the one piece of furniture we had brought from their old apartment because we hadn't found a replacement yet. She looked small, shrinking into the fabric, clutching a coaster as if terrified to set it down. Then I saw my father. My dad, a man who had worked 12-hour days in the scorching sun to put me through design school, was standing in the hallway that led to the kitchen. He was holding a paper plate. On it sat a cold, pathetic scoop of pasta salad. He was eating standing up, his back pressed against the wall, trying to make himself as flat as possible so the servers rushing past wouldn't bump into him. He looked displaced. He looked like an intruder in the home I had bought for him. "Oh, excuse me," a woman in a floral dress chirped, brushing past me and nearly knocking the champagne from my hand. "Are you with the catering staff? We need more napkins by the diaper cake station." I couldn't breathe. The rage was rising so fast it choked me. I looked toward the center of the room, where a white, throne-like wicker chair had been set up. And there she was. Vanessa, my sister-in-law. She was glowing, radiating that specific brand of smug satisfaction that only she could master. She was holding court, laughing, her hand resting protectively over her baby bump. My brother, Jason, was hovering nearby, holding a tray of appetizers, looking less like a father-to-be and more like a nervous waiter. "This house is just perfect for us," I heard Vanessa say, her voice carrying over the low hum of jazz music. "We really needed the space. You know how it is, expanding the legacy." My grip tightened on the champagne bottle until my knuckles turned white. I had walked into a war zone I didn't know existed, and the casualties were the 2 people I loved most in the world. The betrayal wasn't just in the theft of the space, it was in the erasure of their dignity. I didn't scream. I wanted to. I wanted to hurl the champagne bottle into the center of the diaper cake and scream until the windows rattled. But years of navigating high-stakes, real estate deals, and managing difficult clients had taught me one thing: emotional outbursts get you ignored. Cold, calculated strategy gets you results. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow, and stepped fully into the room. I navigated through the sea of pastel dresses, dodging the women who were oohing and awing over the crown molding I had installed. I made a beeline for my father. "Dad," I whispered, coming up beside him. He jumped, startled, nearly dropping his paper plate. When he saw it was me, a look of profound relief washed over his face, followed immediately by shame. He tried to hide the plate behind his back, like a child caught snacking before dinner. "Georgia," he said, his voice raspy, I didn't know you were coming today." "I didn't know there was a party," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Why are you eating in the hallway? Why aren't you sitting at the table?" Dad looked down at his shoes, scuffed work boots that looked jarringly out of place against the polished hardwood. "Oh, well, you know, Vanessa needed the table for the gifts, and the chairs are all taken by her friends. It's fine, really. I don't mind standing. Keeps the circulation going." He forced a weak smile that broke my heart into 1,000 jagged pieces. "And Mom," I looked toward the corner. "Why is she squeezed into the corner like a piece of old luggage?" "She's just resting," Dad said, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Vanessa said the main seating area was for the active guests. You know, the younger crowd. Mom didn't want to be in the way of the photos." "In the way?" I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Vanessa. She didn't look happy to see me. She looked annoyed, like I was a stain on a newly cleaned rug. "Georgia," she said, her smile tight and not reaching her eyes. "You're here. We didn't think you'd make it. Jason said you were busy with some big project in the city." "I decided to surprise Mom and Dad," I said, keeping my face impassive. "Since, you know, this is their house." Vanessa let out a small, dismissive laugh, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, sure, but we're all family, right? And honestly, look at this place. It was just screaming for an event like this. Martha and David barely use the living room anyway. They prefer the quieter corners." "They prefer them?" I asked, tilting my head. "Or were they told to stay in them?" Vanessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, her tone shifting from hostess to conspirator. "Look, Georgia, let's be real. They're old. They don't need all this space. Jason and I are the ones building a future. We're the growing family. It just makes sense for us to maximize the utility of the property. We've actually been discussing some changes for the nursery upstairs." The nursery, the room I had designed as a hobby room for my mother's sewing. "Changes," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes," Vanessa said, preening slightly. "The lighting in there is terrible for a baby, and we need to repaint. That sage green is a bit dated. We were thinking a soft gray." I looked over her shoulder at Jason. He saw me looking and immediately pretended to be very interested in a tray of deviled eggs. He knew. He knew exactly what was happening, and he was letting it happen because it was easier than standing up to her. "I see," I said, "so you've moved in." "We're transitioning," Vanessa corrected, smoothing her maternity dress. "It's better for everyone. We can help take care of them, and we get the space we need. It's a win-win." She looked at me with such absolute confidence. She truly believed that possession was 9/10 of the law. She believed that because she was pregnant, and because my parents were too kind to say no, she had won. She thought this was her house now. She turned back to her guests, clapping her hands. "Okay, everyone, gift opening time." I watched her walk away, treating me like a guest in the home I paid for. She thought she held all the cards. She thought my silence was submission. But she had forgotten one crucial thing. I reached into my oversized tote bag. My fingers brushed against the cool, crisp paper of the folder I had brought with me. I hadn't brought the deed to give to my parents today. They already knew I bought the house. I had brought the official recorded deed because I wanted to show my dad his name on the county paperwork to prove it was real. But looking at it now, I realized it was more than paperwork. It was ammunition. To understand why the sight of my father eating cold pasta in a hallway broke me, you have to understand who David and Martha are. They are the kind of people who apologize to the table when they bump into it. My father spent 35 years as a bricklayer. His hands are permanently calloused, his back permanently curved. He never bought a new car. He drove a succession of rusted beaters so that he could pay for my art supplies and Jason's hockey gear. My mother worked nights stocking shelves at a grocery store so she could be home when we got off the school bus. They never asked for anything. When I started making real money with my design firm, Georgia Designs, and then later through flipping real estate, I had to practically force them to accept gifts. Buying this house was supposed to be the finish line. It was a $45,000. Zero cottage in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. I had liquidated a significant portion of my stock portfolio to pay for it in cash. I wanted them to have zero mortgage, zero worry. I wanted them to have a garden. I wanted them to have dignity. And then there was Vanessa. Jason had met her 3 years ago at a marketing conference. At first, she seemed fine, ambitious, polished, perhaps a bit high maintenance, but Jason seemed happy. He was a soft-spoken guy, an accountant who hated conflict, and he seemed to like having someone who made all the decisions. But as the wedding approached, the cracks started to show. Vanessa didn't just have preferences, she had demands. She demanded my parents pay for a rehearsal dinner they couldn't afford. She demanded I design their apartment for free, then complained that the furniture I sourced at cost wasn't luxury enough. She was 32, a lifestyle consultant, a vague profession that seemed to involve a lot of coffee dates and Instagram posts, but very little actual income. Yet, she had a taste for the finer things that Jason's salary couldn't support. Since announcing her pregnancy, the entitlement had metastasized. "I'm carrying the first grandchild," she would say, as if she were carrying the heir to a throne. "I need stress-free environments. I need resources." I watched her now, sitting in that wicker throne, tearing open a gift bag. "Oh, cashmere booties," she squealed, holding them up for the room to admire. "Finally, something with a little class." The room laughed. My mother, sitting in the corner, flinched. I knew that flinch. Mom had knitted a pair of booties for the baby last week. She had shown them to me proudly over FaceTime. They were yellow acrylic yarn, not cashmere, but they were made with love. Vanessa had likely tossed them in the trash or buried them in a drawer, deeming them not classy enough. I looked at Jason again. He was standing by the punch bowl, looking miserable but compliant. He caught my eye and finally walked over, keeping his voice low. "Georgia, please," he whispered, his eyes darting toward Vanessa to make sure she wasn't watching. "Don't make a scene. She's hormonal. She's been under a lot of stress." "Stress?" I hissed, tilting my head toward Dad. "Jason, look at Dad. He's eating in the hallway. Mom is cowering in the corner, in their house. How long has this been going on?" Jason rubbed the back of his neck, sweating. "It just happened. Vanessa said the apartment was too small for the baby gear. We started bringing boxes over. Then she said we should stay a few nights to help Mom and Dad with the maintenance. And then, well, she just kind of started decorating." "Decorating?" I pointed to the wall where my parents' wedding photo used to be. It was gone, replaced by a framed print that said Boss Babe in gold foil script. "She took down their memories, Jason." "She said it clashed with the shower theme," Jason mumbled. "She said she'd put it back later. Look, just let her have today. Please, for the baby, we're family." "We are family," I said, my voice ice cold. "But I'm starting to wonder if you remember which family you belong to." I looked back at Vanessa. She was now unwrapping a high-tech baby monitor. "We're going to set this up in the master bedroom," she announced to the room. "The acoustics in there are much better for the baby than the guest room." The master bedroom, my parents' bedroom. That was it. The final straw didn't just break, it incinerated. She wasn't just visiting. She was actively evicting them within their own walls. She was planning to take the master suite and shove my parents into the guest room, or worse. I looked at the folder in my bag. I looked at my dad, wiping his mouth with a cocktail napkin because he couldn't find a real one. I checked my watch, 2:15 p.m., The party was in full swing. Perfect. Jason, I said, stepping away from him, I'm not going to make a scene. I paused, smoothing my blazer. I'm going to make a correction. I didn't storm into the center of the room immediately. That would have been the emotional reaction, the reaction of a sister defending her brother. But I wasn't just a sister right now. I was a landlord, an investor, and a woman who knew that in any negotiation, information was the currency that bought you the win. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I need to use the restroom, I said to Jason, my voice deceptively calm. He looked relieved, thinking I was retreating. Yeah, sure, upstairs. The downstairs one is, well, Vanessa is storing the extra gifts in there. Of course she was. I walked past my father, who was still picking at his pasta salad, and squeezed his shoulder gently. Don't go anywhere, Dad, I whispered. I mean it. I climbed the stairs, the oak treads I had lovingly refinished feeling solid beneath my heels. As soon as I reached the landing, the noise of the party faded into a dull roar, replaced by a different K. End of tension. The air up here smelled different, sharper. It smelled of fresh paint and dishonesty. I walked to the door of what was supposed to be the guest room, the room intended for me or other relatives to stay in. The door was open. Inside, it looked like a storage unit exploded. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, all labeled in my mother's handwriting. Kitchen, living room knickknacks, David's books. My heart hammered against my ribs. Vanessa hadn't just decorated the downstairs, she had purged it. She had packed up my parents' lives and shoved them into a single 10x12 room, preparing to erase their footprint from the main living areas entirely. I moved down the hall to the hobby room. This was the room with the best light in the house, facing south. I had installed custom shelving for my mother's sewing machine and her vast collection of fabrics. It was supposed to be her happy place. I pushed the door open. The room was unrecognizable. The walls, which I had painted a warm, creamy white, were now a slapdash, headache-inducing shade of baby blue. The custom shelving I had designed and paid a carpenter to install was gone, ripped out, leaving jagged holes in the drywall that had been hastily spackled over but not sanded. In the center of the room stood a crib. It wasn't assembled yet, but the box was leaning against the wall. And in the corner, shoved aggressively against the closet door, was my mother's vintage Singer sewing machine. It was upside down. I felt a flash of heat behind my eyes. That machine had been her grandmother's. But the real smoking gun was the master suite. I walked to the end of the hall. The door was closed. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The master bedroom was supposed to be my parents' retreat. I had splurged on a California king bed with a tufted headboard and high thread count linens. The bed was there, but it was covered in clothes that definitely didn't belong to Martha or David. Designer shopping bags were strewn across the duvet. On the dresser, my father's framed photos of his grandkids. My cousins' kids were face down. In their place stood a row of ultrasound photos and a framed quote, "Manifest your dreams." I opened the walk-in closet. My mother's modest wardrobe had been pushed to the far back, squeezed into a dark corner. The front two-thirds of the rack were filled with Vanessa's clothes. Not maternity clothes, but her entire wardrobe. High-end coats, evening gowns, rows of shoes. This wasn't a transition or a temporary stay for the baby's birth. This was a hostile takeover. They had moved in. Fully. And from the looks of the packed boxes in the guest room, they were in the final stages of pushing my parents out of the master suite entirely, likely relegating them to the small guest room I had just seen. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of absolute clarity. I dialed my lawyer, Alan. It was Saturday, but I paid a retainer for a reason. "Georgia," he answered on the second ring. "Is everything okay? You're supposed to be celebrating the housewarming." "I am," I said, my voice steel. "Alan, I need you to confirm something for me. The deed transfer to the trust. It's finalized, right? the trust that lists me as the sole trustee and my parents as the beneficiaries. Yes, it was recorded 3 weeks ago, Alan said, sounding confused. Technically, the legal owner is the Martha and David Irrevocable Trust, but you have full executive power as the trustee until their passing. Why? And there's no lease agreement for any other tenants, no subletting clauses. Georgia, you know there isn't. You wrote the bylaws yourself. It's a single-family residence for the primary use of the beneficiaries. Anyone else is a guest at your discretion. Great, I said, staring at Vanessa's pile of shoes. And what is the legal definition of a guest who refuses to leave in this state? Alan paused. If they've been there less than 30 days and have no lease, they're guests. You can ask them to leave. If they refuse, it's trespassing. Georgia, what is going on? A hostile takeover, I said. I'm about to execute an eviction. Stand by. I hung up. I took a picture of the closet. I took a picture of the sewing machine upside down. Then I turned around, walked out of the master bedroom, and headed downstairs. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the atmosphere had shifted. The gift opening was over, and the cake was being cut. It was a 3-tiered monstrosity with fondant baby shoes on it. Vanessa was holding the knife, posing for a picture while Jason stood awkwardly beside her, his hand hovering near her waist but not quite touching it. Okay, everyone, Vanessa chirped. Cake time, and then we'll do the tour of the nursery. The tour of the nursery. She was going to take these strangers upstairs to show off how she had desecrated my mother's sewing room. I walked into the center of the room. I didn't push through people. I moved with such directed energy that they parted for me instinctively. Vanessa, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chatter like a knife through that fondant. Vanessa looked up, the cake knife poised in midair. Her smile faltered, then stiffened. Georgia, you're just in time for cake. I was just upstairs, I interrupted, standing 5 feet from her. The room went quiet. The jazz music seemed to suddenly get very loud before someone near the stereo wisely turned it down. I went to use the restroom, but I ended up taking a look at the renovations. Vanessa's eyes darted to Jason, then back to me. Oh, well, it's not finished, obviously. The nursery is still a work in progress and… I'm not talking about the nursery, I said, crossing my arms. I'm talking about the master bedroom. Jason audibly swallowed. Vanessa straightened her spine, gripping the knife tighter. We're storing some things in there. Like I said, we're maximizing space. Maximize space? I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Vanessa, your clothes are in the closet. Your shoes are on the rack. My mother's clothes are shoved into the back corner like dirty laundry, and my father's things are boxed up in the guest room. I turned to my parents, who were still huddled in the corner. My mom looked terrified, her eyes wide and watery. Mom, I asked, my voice softening just for her, did you agree to move into the guest room? The room was dead silent. All eyes turned to the small woman on the love seat. Martha looked at Vanessa, then at Jason. I saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of me, but fear of causing a rift, fear of losing access to her future grandchild. We just want to help, Mom whispered, her voice trembling. Vanessa said the baby needs the room near the bathroom, and the stairs, she said the stairs are dangerous for her right now. The master bedroom is on the 1st floor, Mom, I said gently. The room with the ensuite bathroom that I built specifically so you wouldn't have to climb stairs. I turned back to Vanessa. You moved my parents, who are in their 70s, upstairs to the guest room so you could have the master suite. Vanessa dropped the sweet hostess act. Her face hardened, her chin tilting up defensively. It's temporary, Georgia. God, you're making such a scene. I'm pregnant. I have swollen ankles. I need the bathtub. Martha and David barely use that big bathroom anyway. It's wasted on them. It's their house, I said, articulating every syllable. It's family property, Vanessa snapped, her voice rising. Jason is their son. I'm carrying their grandchild. We are the future of this family. We need the support. We need the space. What are they going to do with 4 bedrooms? It's selfish for them to rattle around in this big house while we're crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment. The word hung in the air, selfish. She had just called my parents, who were currently eating cold food in the corner of the house they owned, selfish. Selfish, I repeated, stepping closer. My father is eating standing up. My mother is afraid to sit on her own furniture, and you call them selfish. I'm hosting an event, Vanessa yelled, throwing her hands up. I'm trying to build a network. I'm trying to set up a life for your nephew. Why are you trying to ruin this? Jason, say something. She turned on her husband. Jason looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floorboards. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Georgia, he mumbled, let's just talk about this later, not in front of the guests. No, I said, we're talking about it now. Because later implies there's a negotiation, and I need to make it very clear that there isn't one. You're unbelievable, Vanessa scoffed, shaking her head at her friends, looking for validation. A few of the women murmured in agreement, shooting me dirty looks. To them, I was the jealous sister-in-law ruining a pregnant woman's special day. She's always been like this, Vanessa told the crowd, creating her own narrative in real time. Controlling, jealous that she doesn't have a family of her own. She thinks because she helped with the design, she owns the place. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. Let's get the facts straight, Georgia. Jason and I are taking over the payments. We discussed it with David last week. We're going to pay the mortgage, so technically, this is going to be our house. We're doing them a favor by taking the financial burden off them so they can relax. I froze. I looked at my dad. He was staring at the floor, his face bright red. Dad, I asked, did they tell you they were taking over the mortgage? Dad nodded slowly. Jason said, he said the taxes and the insurance and the mortgage were going to be too much for us on a fixed income. He said if they moved in, they'd pay the monthly note. It seemed fair. My blood boiled. This was the manipulation. This was the con. Vanessa, I said, my voice dangerously low, there is no mortgage. Vanessa blinked. What? There is no mortgage, I repeated, louder this time. I didn't help with the design. I bought this house. Cash, $450,000. I paid the property taxes for the next 5 years in advance. I paid the insurance in full. I took a step forward, closing the gap between us. There is no financial burden, Vanessa. The only burden in this house is you. The gasps from the guests were audible this time. Vanessa's face went pale, then blotchy red. She looked at Jason. You said we were taking over the mortgage to get on the deed. Jason flinched. I assumed there was a mortgage. Most houses have mortgages. You assumed, I said, looking at my brother with a mixture of pity and disgust. You tried to trick our parents into signing over ownership rights in exchange for paying a debt that didn't exist. We weren't tricking them, Vanessa shrieked, her poise completely gone. We're family. It all goes to us eventually anyway. We just accelerated the timeline because we need it now. Do you have any idea how expensive babies are? Do you have any idea the lifestyle we're trying to maintain? I don't care about your lifestyle, I said. I care about the fact that you ripped out my mother's sewing room. It's a nursery, Vanessa screamed. I need a nursery, you're being hysterical. Look, fine, you paid for the house. Good for you, moneybags, but possession is what matters. We live here, our stuff is here. We're receiving mail here. You can't just kick out a pregnant woman and her husband. We have rights. We're tenants. She crossed her arms over her chest, a smug, triumphant look returning to her face. She thought she had me. She thought she knew the law. She thought that because she had moved her shoes in, she was untouchable. I'm glad you brought that up, I said. I reached into my bag. The rustle of the paper was the only sound in the room. I actually spoke to my lawyer, Alan, about 3 minutes ago, while I was upstairs looking at the damage you caused to my property. I pulled out the blue folder. I didn't open it yet. I just held it, tapping it against my palm. You see, Vanessa, to be a tenant, you usually need a lease, or you need to have paid rent. You've done neither. According to state law, since you've been here less than 30 days, which I can prove, since I have the text messages from Jason asking for the gate code 3 weeks ago, you are considered guests at will. Vanessa's smirk wavered. We've been here, well, it feels like longer. You can't prove when we moved in. I have the security camera logs, I lied smoothly. I didn't, but she didn't know that. And I have the dated receipts from the movers you hired. Don't try to bluff me, Vanessa. I do this for a living. I opened the folder. I pulled out the deed of trust. It was a thick document, embossed with the county seal. This, I said, holding it up so everyone could see the gold stamp, is the deed. It lists the owner of this property as the Martha and David Irrevocable Trust. And do you know who the sole trustee is? I looked her dead in the eye. Me. I slammed the deed down on the table, right next to the cake. The plastic stand rattled. And as the trustee, I said, my voice ringing out with the finality of a judge's gavel, I am officially revoking your guest privileges. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, suffocating. It felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room, leaving only the scent of expensive perfume and the distinct smell of panic. Vanessa stared at the deed on the table. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely unsure of her footing. But Vanessa was a creature of ego, and when cornered, ego doesn't surrender, it lashes out. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. It sounded brittle, like glass breaking. You're revoking guest privileges, she repeated, looking around at her friends as if inviting them to share the joke. Did you hear that? She thinks she can just kick us out. Georgia, stop being dramatic. You're ruining the vibe. The vibe is already ruined, Vanessa, I said, my voice steady. Because the party is over. Everyone needs to leave. Now. I looked around at the guests. I apologize for the inconvenience, but this event is canceled. Please take your gifts and exit the premises immediately. A few of the women started to shuffle awkwardly, reaching for their purses. The spell of Vanessa's influence was breaking. They sensed the danger, the legal reality of that document sitting next to the cake. No one is going anywhere, Vanessa shrieked, stepping in front of the door like a guard dog. This is my baby shower. These are my guests. You don't get to command my friends. She turned on me, her face twisting into a mask of pure malice. You're just jealous, Georgia. You've always been. Jealous? You're a lonely, bitter spinster with a bank account but no life. You buy things for people because you think it buys their love. Well, guess what? It doesn't. Jason and I are the ones who are actually here. We're the ones giving them a grandchild. You're just the wallet. The insult hung in the air, cruel and calculated. I saw my mother flinch in the corner. I saw Jason cover his face with his hands. But I didn't flinch. I felt a strange sense of calm. She had just shown everyone exactly who she was. I may be the wallet, I said softly, but right now, the wallet is closed. And since you brought up the topic of giving things to our parents, let's talk about what you were planning to take. I turned to the guests, raising my voice slightly so the women near the back could hear. Before I came down here, I checked the public records on my phone. Vanessa mentioned earlier that they were taking over the mortgage to help my parents. But since there is no mortgage, I dug a little deeper into why she would need my parents to sign paperwork. I looked at Jason. He went pale. Jason, did you know that Vanessa has a pending lien on her credit report? And that she was trying to get Mom and Dad to co-sign a home equity line of credit on this property? Jason's head snapped up. What? No, she said. She said it was just transfer papers for the utility bills. She lied, I said, pointing at Vanessa. She was trying to leverage the equity in this paid-off house, my paid-off house, to take out a loan in Mom and Dad's name. She wasn't paying their bills. She was planning to use their home as an ATM to fund her lifestyle. The room erupted in whispers. The guests were no longer confused. They were scandalized. Attempting to trick elderly in-laws into debt was a line that even the most entitled social climber knew not to cross. Vanessa's face went from red to a ghostly white. That's a lie. You're making that up. Am I? I pulled up the email on my phone from my lawyer, who had done a quick search while I was on the line earlier. I have the inquiry right here. Applicant, Vanessa Miller. Co-signers, David and Martha Miller. Collateral, residential property. I held the phone up. Vanessa lunged for it, but I stepped back. It's fraud, Vanessa, I said coldly. And since I am the trustee, I am the only one who can authorize a lien. You were trying to bypass me. You were trying to steal from them. Vanessa looked around, desperate for an ally. She grabbed Jason's arm. Jason, do something. She's humiliating me. She's stressing the baby. Tell her to get out. Jason looked at his wife. He looked at the deed on the table. He looked at the inquiry on my phone. And then he looked at our father, still holding his paper plate in the hallway. For the first time in his life, Jason pulled his arm away. You lied to me, Jason whispered. You told me the house had a mortgage. You told me we were helping them. I did it for us, Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking. For our family, for your son, who cares how we get the money? They don't need it. They're old. They're just sitting on a gold mine while we struggle. Get out. The voice didn't come from me. It didn't come from Jason. We all turned. My mother, Martha, had stood up. She was no longer shrinking into the corner. She was standing tall, her hands trembling not from fear, but from rage. She walked over to the table, picked up the Boss Babe framed print that Vanessa had used to replace their wedding photo, and dropped it into the trash can. The sound of the frame hitting the bottom of the bin was satisfyingly loud. Mom, Vanessa whispered, her eyes wide. Mom, you don't mean that. Think about the baby. Do not use that child as a shield, Mom said, her voice shaking with an intensity I had never heard before. I raised 2 children in a 1-bedroom apartment while working nights. We never stole, we never lied, and we never ever treated family like servants. Mom pointed to the door. Her finger was steady now. This is Georgia's house. She bought it for us. And you have disrespected her, you have disrespected your father, and you have disrespected me. You are not welcome here. Take your balloons, take your cake, and get out. But where will we go? Vanessa stammered, tears finally streaming down her face, tears of defeat, not sorrow. We gave up our apartment, we have nowhere to go. You have parents, my father spoke up, stepping forward to stand next to Mom. He put his arm around her. I suggest you call them, because you aren't staying here, not tonight, not ever. Vanessa looked at the crowd of women, who were now actively fleeing the scene, leaving gifts behind in their haste to escape the drama. She looked at Jason, who was staring at the floor, refusing to meet her gaze. She looked at me, the immovable object. She let out a scream of frustration, grabbed her purse, and stormed out the front door, slammin'. Gee, it's so hard the windows rattled. Silence returned to the room, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was the silence of a storm that had finally passed. The next 3 hours were a blur of activity, but it was a cleansing kind of work. I didn't let Jason leave immediately. I made him help. You're going to pack everything, I told him. Every piece of clothing, every box, every decoration she put up. I want it all in the garage by sunset. You can rent a U-Haul tomorrow to pick it up. Jason didn't argue. He moved like a ghost, his eyes red and puffy. He spent an hour in the master bedroom, stripping the bed and moving Vanessa's clothes into trash bags because we didn't have enough suitcases. I watched him carry the bags out, one by one, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his own complicity. While he packed, I called a locksmith. By 5:00 p.m., the locks were changed. I went into the hobby room and dragged the crib apart. I moved the sewing machine back to its rightful spot, flipping it upright and dusting it off. I found the box labeled David's Books in the guest room and brought it downstairs, placing it back on the shelf next to his recliner. By 7:00 p.m., the house looked like a home again. The balloons were in the trash. The smell of cloying lilies had been replaced by the fresh breeze coming through the open windows. Jason stood by the front door, holding the last box of his own things. He looked at Mom and Dad, who were sitting on the couch, their couch, drinking tea. "I'm sorry," Jason choked out. "I didn't know about the loan, I swear. I wanted to make her happy. I thought if I gave her what she wanted, she'd stop being so angry." Mom stood up and walked over to him. She hugged him, but it was a different kind of hug. It was the hug of a mother who loves her son but is disappointed in the man he has become. "Love isn't about giving someone what they want at the expense of everyone else," she said gently. "You have a lot of work to do, Jason, on yourself, and on your marriage, if there's even a marriage left to save." Jason nodded, tears spilling over. "I'm going to stay at a motel tonight. Vanessa went to her mom's. I think I need some time alone." He looked at me. "Thank you, Georgia, for stopping it. I don't think I could have." "You could have," I said sternly. "You just didn't. Next time, don't wait for your big sister to save you." He nodded and walked out into the twilight. I locked the new deadbolt behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I turned back to the living room. Dad was already back in his recliner, his feet up. Mom was patting the cushion of the velvet armchair. "Come sit, Georgia," she said. I sat down. For a long time, we didn't say anything. We just sat there, reclaiming the space with our presence. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Dad said eventually, staring at his hands. "We didn't want to worry you. We didn't want to cause a fight between you and your brother." "Dad," I said, reaching over to hold his rough, calloused hand. "You didn't cause this. They did. But promise me something. Promise me you'll never let anyone treat you like a guest in your own home again, not even family." "I promise," he said, squeezing my hand. "And Georgia," Mom added, a mischievous twinkle returning to her eye. "Can we paint the hobby room back to white? That blue is truly hideous." I laughed. It was a genuine, full-bellied laugh that released all the tension of the day. "Yes, Mom, we can paint it whatever color you want. I'll pick up the supplies tomorrow." 3 months later. The house is finally perfect. The sage green paint is back on the walls, the garden is blooming. As for the fallout, it was swift and brutal for Vanessa. The attempted fraud with the home equity loan was a step too far. When her parents found out she had been evicted and tried to trick us, they took her in, but on strict conditions. She's living in their basement now, apparently quite humbled by the lack of luxury. Jason filed for divorce 2 weeks after the baby shower. It turns out the mortgage scam wasn't the only financial secret she was keeping. He's currently living in a studio apartment, going to therapy, and slowly rebuilding his relationship with us. He comes over on Sundays to mow the lawn for Dad, not because he has to, but because he wants to. I visited my parents yesterday. When I walked in, Mom was in her sewing room, the sun streaming in over her shoulder as she worked on a quilt. Dad was in the living room, asleep in his recliner with a mystery novel on his chest. They weren't guests, they weren't servants, they were the owners. And as I watched them, peaceful and safe, I knew that every penny, every argument, and every second of that confrontation had been worth it. I had bought the house with money, but I had secured their home with the truth. And that was an investment that would pay dividend. As forever,